Welcome to day 30 of Purpose-Driven Church for Unificationists. We are finishing the chapter on knowing whom you can best reach. And if you remember from what we read yesterday, we talked a lot about how we attract more of what we already are. And Rick Warren continues this chapter and starts talking now about what if our church doesn't match our community. So he says it's ideal if the leadership and the congregation are matching the target demographic or the people in your community that you are trying to attract. But if that's just not the case, what do you do? And he says, well, first of all, don't try to be something you're not. He says, if your church is primarily made up of elderly folks, decide to become the most effective ministry to senior citizens that you can possibly be. Keep doing what you're strong at, just do it better. So recognizing that, most likely you're going to be the most attractive to those people and you're going to understand their needs the best. So do the best you can and reach those people and take care of those people because maybe there's a group of people in your community that only you can reach. He says another option is to reinvent your congregation. He says reinventing the congregation is when you intentionally change the makeup of your church in order to match a new target. You completely replace all the old programs, structures, and worship styles with new ones. I want this to be very clear. I do not advise this. It is a painful process and may take many years. I do not, people will leave the church due to the enormous inevitable conflicts. If you lead this process, you will probably be vilified as Satan incarnate by older members unless you've been there longer than anyone else, everyone else. I have seen this done successfully, but not without an enormous amount of persistence and willingness to absorb criticism. It takes a very loving, patient, and gifted pastor to lead a church in reinventing itself. I think this is really interesting because I've never really heard it so succinctly explained. But I think that it explains a lot why when people try to come into one of our communities and make in a sense, try to reinvent the culture or try to reinvent the way that things are done or, really try to orient things in a new direction, way different than the way things have been done in the past. It's so difficult. And it's just really interesting for me to hear Rick Warren talk about it so clearly like this. And honestly, I can really relate to it a lot. He says another option is to start a new congregation, which he loves to recommend. He's really into that. He says it doesn't even have to start off with a new church. You could just start off with a new service. Instead of trying to change what you're already doing, just start a new one. Like if you want to reach out to younger people, start a more contemporary service with more upbeat music and a different worship style, different sermons, so on and so forth. You can even do this with the intent to eventually turn it into a whole separate church, but to start it off that way. He says that a sign of a truly mature church is the ability for it to reproduce. Similar to biology, when a person or an animal is mature, then it's able to reproduce. He says the mark of a truly mature church is that it has babies. It starts other churches. And by Saddleback's 15th anniversary, they had already started 25 other churches. And he finishes the chapter just by spending a couple pages talking about spiritual receptivity. He just talks about how, you have to recognize that there are times where people are more receptive to spirituality in their life than at other times. He just talks about the importance of being strategic and even recognizing that even within your church, there's going to be people who are more receptive to, spirituality or getting more involved or receiving certain things than other people at different times. He talks about how spiritual receptivity is something that comes and goes in people's lives like an ocean tide. Anytime someone experiences major change, whether positive or negative, it seems to create a hunger for spiritual stability. At Saddleback, we found that people are more receptive to the gospel when they face changes, like a new marriage, a new baby, a new home, a new job, or a new school. He even goes on to list 10 areas in which they found people are the most receptive. 10 10 most receptive groups of people that they've reached out to. And this includes second-time visitors to the church, close friends and relatives, people going through a divorce, people who feel their need for recovery programs, so on and so forth. It's a good list, kind of common sense if you think about it. But he says that a possible goal for a church would be to develop specific programs to reach out to these kinds of people. And he just touches on this one last point before we finish that I thought was really interesting. He just talks about how naturally when you start to do that, some people might say, he says here, Pastor, I think that before we try to reach all these new people, we should try to reactivate all the old members that have stopped coming. He says this is a guarantee strategy for church decline. It doesn't work. It usually takes about 5 times more energy to reactivate a disgruntled or carnal member than it does to win a receptive unbeliever. He says, if you want to grow, focus on reaching receptive people. So that is the end of that chapter. So tomorrow we'll look at chapter 11. Thank you very much.